Hello everyone, and welcome to Sherlock Tales. I'm thrilled to have you here for tonight's long-form mystery. Before we begin, let me ask, from where in the world are you watching? And what time is it for you right now? Grab a blanket, settle in, and prepare your mind. Because this mystery, the Apothecary's Game, will take us into shadowy alleys, secret codes, and deadly medicines. Let us begin. The first sign that something peculiar was unfolding in London came not in the form of a murder nor a theft, but in the odd matter of a man found unconscious in a Soho alley with a violet-stained thumb and no memory of who he was. Inspector Lestrade summoned us to St. Bartholomew's that morning, interrupting our breakfast with one of his usual vague telegrams. Interesting case. Possibly medical, possibly mad, worth your time. L. Ella. Holmes read the note, folded it neatly and rose without a word. I sighed, abandoned my toast, and followed him to the cab that was already waiting. At St. Bart's, we found Lestrade standing beside the bed of a man perhaps 50 years of age, respectably dressed, unconscious, and entirely unremarkable, save for the single striking feature. The thumb of his right hand was stained deep violet, as though dipped in ink or paint. No sign of trauma, the doctor said. No known injuries. He collapsed near Beak Street. No papers, no wallet, and oddly enough, no fingerprints. No fingerprints, I repeated. None, the doctor confirmed. The skin is smooth, as if chemically erased. Holmes stepped forward, examined the thumb closely, then took a whiff of the man's breath. Gentian violet, he murmured, but not applied externally. Ingested, then exhaled through the skin. A potent tincture, likely mixed with alcohol. Lestrade frowned. Poisoned? Holmes shook his head. Conditioned. That night, I returned home to find Holmes buried in medical texts, cross-referencing formulas and historical usage of gentian derivatives. When I asked what he was looking for, he answered only, "A signature." By the following morning, he had it. The man's symptoms match a very specific process once used by certain South American apothecaries. Pharmacological resetting of the mind using a violet alkaloid compound. It induces controlled amnesia. Why would anyone want to forget themselves, I asked. Because what they knew, Holmes said darkly, was too dangerous to carry awake. The next development arrived not through Lestrade, but through a messenger boy bearing a sealed envelope. Inside, a letter written in trembling script. He was the first. There will be more. Stop the clock before it chimes. See, there was no return address, but the letter was accompanied by a pressed sprig of Aconitum napellus, monkshood, also known as wolfsbane. Holmes turned it over in his fingers. Another apothecary's calling card, he said, but this one's a warning. We returned to Soho the next morning, retracing the man's last known steps. A greengrocer recalled seeing him stagger from an alley behind a shuttered apothecary shop, Addison's Tonics and Remedies. The shop, long closed to the public, bore a rusted sign and curtains drawn tight, but Holmes, after a few moments of inspection, discovered that the dust on the doorknob had been recently disturbed. He produced his lockpicks. "I believe," he said, "our game has begun." The interior of Addison's shop was like stepping into another century. Rows of labelled glass bottles, dried herbs, tinctures suspended in amber. A ledger sat open on the counter, its most recent entry circled in violet ink. D. Whitcomb, final formula delivered, 9:15 p.m. Whitcomb, Holmes muttered. Likely the man in the hospital, but what formula? And delivered to whom? In the back room we discovered a chemistry set still warm to the touch, and an envelope sealed in wax bearing the insignia of a serpent entwined with a quill. Inside, a list of names, 23 of them. Only one name was underlined in violet, Dr. Mortimer Vale. Holmes stared at it for a long moment. "Watson," he said quietly, "we need to visit an old acquaintance of mine." Dr. Mortimer Vale was not, strictly speaking, a doctor, nor was he listed in any official registry. He operated from a townhouse in Kensington under the guise of a pharmaceutical historian, though the odd comings and goings of his clientele hinted at more illicit services. We found him in his conservatory, pruning herbs that I strongly suspected were illegal. "Sherlock," he said with a smile, "how nostalgic. To what do I owe the pleasure?" "A man named Whitcomb," Holmes said. "Your name was linked to a list found in his possession. Do you know him?" Vale's smile faded. "He was an emissary," he said at last, "for the Violet Circle." I frowned. "And what, pray tell, is that?" Vale looked to me, then back to Holmes. "The Circle," he said, "is an old order. Apothecaries without borders. Men and women who traffic in memory, identity, transformation. They believe that the mind is clay, and they mould it with tinctures and time." Holmes nodded slowly. "And why would one of their emissaries be found collapsed in Soho with his memory erased?" "Because," Vale said, "he found out what the Circle is preparing, and he wanted out." That evening, as we stepped back into the fog-laced streets, Holmes turned to me and said, "There are forces at work here, Watson, older than the law. They do not kill with knives or guns. They erase with formulas, alter identity, manufacture forgetting." I shivered. "And you think the Violet Circle is planning something?" Holmes nodded grimly. "Something that must be stopped before the clock chimes." He paused. "And I fear we're already behind. 2 days after our visit to Dr. Mortimer Vale, the second victim surfaced, though victim may not be the correct term. He arrived not on a stretcher, but through our own front door at 221B, delivered by a cabman who swore the man had flagged him down in Whitechapel and asked in perfect politeness to be taken to the detective who solves riddles about forgetting. The man, tall, gaunt, with hair the colour of clay, stood in the middle of our sitting room, smiling faintly. "Mr. Holmes," he said, "I think I've done something terrible, but I cannot remember what." His name, he said, was Jonathan Greaves, though he admitted that name came not from memory but from a card found in his coat pocket. Like Whitcomb before him, he bore no visible injuries, but the nail of his right thumb was dyed a telltale violet. Holmes examined him in silence, then sat across from him and folded his hands. "What was the last thing you do remember, Mr. Greaves?" The man smiled gently. "I remember water, something being stirred, a string around a bottle, and a phrase, 'When the bell rings thrice, the forgetting begins.' That's all." After we had secured Greaves a bed in the spare room and instructed Mrs. Hudson to keep him comfortable, Holmes turned to me and said, "2 victims now, both branded with the Circle's ink, both speaking in riddles." "Or codes," I added, "that phrase, about the bell." Holmes nodded, already rifling through our files. "I recall a case from 5 years ago, a death at a boarding school in Chiswick, a chemist's son dead in his sleep, left behind a journal filled with nonsense phrases, including one nearly identical to what Greaves said." He found the file, opened it, and pointed. When the bell rings thrice, the forgetting begins. Do not drink, do not look into the glass. She is already here. Who was she? I asked. Holmes narrowed his eyes. That, Watson, is what I intend to find out. That afternoon we travelled to Chiswick, to the site of the now closed Lowick Academy, the scene of that forgotten case. The building was abandoned, its windows boarded, its lawn overtaken by ivy, and yet someone had been there recently. The front lock was new. Inside, Holmes discovered a set of muddy footprints, small, narrow, and leading to the old laboratory wing. There we found a single candle still warm, and on the wall freshly scratched words, "The circle remembers even what you forget." In a drawer, Holmes discovered a bundle of wax-sealed papers. Each bore the serpent and quill insignia we had seen at Addison's apothecary. He slit one open. Inside was a formula, a list of ingredients in Latin. At the bottom a phrase in bold script, Aletheia 3x. Truth serum? I asked. Holmes shook his head. Number Aletheia, in Greek mythology, is not simply truth, it is unforgotten truth. This formula is designed not to reveal secrets, but to restore lost memories. I blinked. And the circle was stockpiling it here? Holmes nodded slowly. That tells us two things. They fear discovery, and they built safeguards for their own minds. That evening, as we examined the formula under lamplight, a sharp knock came at our door. A woman entered, tall, pale, wearing gloves of soft black leather. Her eyes were ringed in exhaustion, but sharp with intelligence. "I am Clara Vale," she said, "sister of Mortimer Vale. I believe my brother has gone missing, and I think he was part of something you're trying to stop." We exchanged glances. Holmes gestured to the chair. "You're not wrong, Miss Vale. Tell us everything." Clara spoke of her brother's increasingly erratic behaviour over the past year. Long absences, strange visitors, formulas scribbled on napkins, and dreams he described as borrowed. Then 3 days ago, he vanished. He left behind only a note. "I must go where the mind ends. If I do not return, remember the exactor." Holmes stiffened at the word. "Exactor," he murmured. "I haven't heard that name in 10 years. "What is it?" I asked. Holmes stood and crossed to the window, looking out into the London fog. "The exactor was once a title, within a forgotten guild of pharmacological inquisition. They were not healers, they were enforcers." Clara paled. "My brother mentioned a name before he vanished. A woman he called Mother Beth. He said she ran something called the Apothecary's Game." Holmes turned slowly. "I had hoped," he said softly, "she was only a myth." That night, while Clara slept and Greaves wandered muttering half-memories in the guest room, Holmes paced before the fire like a restless ghost. At last he said, "We need to find the remaining names on that list, the 21. I nodded. "But how, if they've all had their minds wiped like Whitcomb and Greaves?" "Not all," Holmes said. "Some would have refused the forgetting, some would have remembered." He turned to me, eyes glinting. "And I know where to find one." The next morning we boarded the early train to Brighton. Holmes said little on the ride down. Only once did he murmur, "The circle always plants its roots near the sea." There's something about the tides, their rhythm, that calms the side effects. We arrived at a modest boarding house overlooking the cliffs. Holmes knocked on the door. An old woman answered. She wore a lavender shawl and held a walking stick with a silver owl at the head. "Miss Felicity Tanners," Holmes said. "You were once called the Brewer of Truth, were you not?" Her eyes narrowed. Then she stepped aside. "Come in, Mr. Holmes. I was wondering when you'd find me." Miss Felicity Tanners brewed her tea with the precision of a chemist and the grace of a priestess. Her hands, though aged, moved with confidence, measuring out exact pinches of rosemary and dried orange peel, then stirring the pot clockwise exactly 9 times. Holmes watched her in silence. "You know what they're doing, don't you?" he asked. She poured the tea into 3 mismatched cups and placed them before us. One for Holmes, one for me. One she left untouched. "They're playing the game again," she said, "but not as it was meant to be played. The rules have changed." "The game?" I asked. Miss Tanners looked at me. "The apothecary's game," she said. "The original circle designed it to test the limits of human consciousness, to gently explore what the mind could forget and what it could survive." She stirred her untouched cup absently. "But then she came, Mother Beth. She turned the game into a weapon." Holmes leaned forward. "We believe she is preparing something significant. There are 23 names. 2 are down. You are the 3rd. Miss Tanners nodded. "I received the invitation. Violet ink, a scent of belladonna. It said only 1 round left. Come play." She rose, went to a locked drawer, and returned with a folded paper sealed in grey wax. Holmes opened it carefully. Inside was a map, not of any place I recognized, but a symbolic diagram. 3 circles, a serpent biting its tail, and a single phrase beneath it all. "Roundhouse 9, bring what must not be forgotten." Holmes stared at it for some time, then, "Have you played before?" Miss Tanners gave a bitter smile. "I played once. I lost a brother to it. Lost him not to death, but to forgetting. When the mind unhooks its anchors, there's no shore left." Holmes tucked the diagram into his coat. "Do you still have what must not be forgotten?" She went very still. Then, from a silver locket at her throat, she pulled a vial no larger than a child's finger. Inside swirled a substance neither liquid nor gas. It shimmered and pulsed. "This," she whispered, "is a memory. Mine, distilled in ether and amaranth oil. If I drink it, I will remember everything, even the pain." Holmes took the vial with reverence. "I believe it may save more than just you." We returned to London that evening. Greaves was gone. Mrs. Hudson swore she had seen no one leave, but a single note had been left on the window-sill, written in perfect cursive. "The Circle thanks you for your hospitality. The game has begun in earnest." J.G.L. Holmes was unsurprised. Greaves was a volunteer, not a victim. He let himself be found, watched us. Now he returns to the game with knowledge. I felt a chill run down my spine. And what does that mean for us? Holmes looked at me darkly. "It means we are now players." The next clue came unexpectedly, from a box delivered by courier with no return label. Inside, a wooden chess piece, a bishop stained violet, and beneath it, a card. "Roundhouse 9, midnight. Do not bring the past, unless you are ready to lose it." Holmes held the chess piece up to the lamp. "Rowan Wood," he said, "an old apothecary's favourite. This isn't a threat, Watson. It's a summons." "Roundhouse 9?" I asked. Holmes reached for his map of London's underworks. "There are 12 decommissioned roundhouses beneath the old Metropolitan rail line. Number 9 is in Wapping, abandoned, and, if rumour is to be believed, repurposed by the Circle long ago." That night, as the clock struck 11, We armed ourselves with a vial, 2 revolvers, and a journal Miss Tanners had given Holmes, The Rules of the Game, as written by its original founders. At 11:53 we arrived at Roundhouse 9. The entrance was sealed with a rusted iron gate and a lock whose keyhole bore the shape of a snake's mouth. Holmes inserted the violet bishop into the mouth. The gate creaked open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of lavender, smoke, and something metallic. There were no lights, only lanterns placed in a perfect circle. 13 seats, 5 occupied. We were the 6th and 7th. A voice emerged from the shadows. "Welcome, players. The apothecary's game begins. Memory is currency. Identity is wager. The prize is survival." Holmes leaned toward me. "Say nothing unless you must. Everything we reveal can be taken." The first round was called Revelation. Each participant was required to write a confession, something true and something they feared remembering. The man beside me, a gaunt fellow with silver rings, wrote, "I killed my twin brother and took his place." The woman 2 seats over, "I sold the formula that led to the collapse of Prague's asylum." Holmes wrote, "I abandoned someone I should have saved." I hesitated. Then I wrote, "I once considered ending my own life after my wand." The papers were burned, and yet I felt a strange relief, as if the memory had been cleansed but not erased. The second round, distillation. Each participant was required to drink a tincture handed to them in identical vials. Holmes held his to the light. "Mandrake," he murmured, "valerian, trace amounts of lithium root, the fogweed." I turned to him. "Drink or die," I whispered. "Drink or forget," he said. Drank. The effect was immediate. The chamber breathed. The lanterns pulsed. Suddenly I could remember every detail of my mother's face, things long buried, her voice when I scraped my knee, the smell of ink on her fingers as she taught me to write. Others around us wept, laughed, fell silent. Holmes remained still. Then he stood and addressed the room. "You are not playing the game," he said. "You are being played. This isn't a test of memory, it's a theft." A ripple of shock. Then from the far end of the chamber, a voice I'd only heard in whispers. "Is that what you believe, Mr. Holmes?" From the shadows stepped a woman in violet robes. Her hair was white. Her eyes burned with knowledge. "I am Mother Beth," she said, "and I invite you to the final round." Mother Beth stood beneath the central lantern, her violet robes swaying like living ink. Her voice, low, resonant, echoed through the chamber with unnatural weight. "This game," she said, "was never about knowledge. It was about capacity. The measure of a soul, not by what it remembers, but by what it can endure to remember." She swept her gaze across the 7 remaining players. "You have each brought something into this chamber that does not belong to you. A secret, a memory, a name, and now it must be paid for." Holmes took a step forward. "You would have us barter with our minds? Turn history into coin?" Mother Beth smiled faintly. "What is history if not remembered belief? And belief is the easiest thing in the world to bend." A gong sounded, soft, metallic, like the toll of distant iron. The third round began. It was called Transference. Each player was instructed to pass an item to the person on their left. The item had to represent something they could not afford to lose. The gaunt man passed a wedding ring. The woman with the dark braid handed over a strip of torn parchment, her original formula. Holmes handed me something wrapped in oilcloth. I opened it. Inside, the tiny silver key to the box, where he stored his brother Mycroft's final letter. My hand trembled. "Are you sure?" I whispered. He nodded once. I passed Mother Beth the vial from Miss Tanner's, the memory locked in amaranth and ether. She accepted it with care and smiled. Then came recollection, the fourth round. Each player had to speak a memory, not their own. Holmes volunteered first. 1879, Afghanistan. I was not there, but I remember it. A field surgeon with hands that would not stop shaking, a bayonet wound sealed in dirt, a lieutenant screaming for his mother. He looked at me, and I knew it was my memory, perfect in detail. But now, his dot, I was struck dumb. He had remembered me so deeply, so thoroughly, that it had rooted itself in his own mind. The woman next to me sobbed. I remember childbirth, a girl. Stillborn, I was never pregnant. The man after her simply said, I remember fire. My house burned, except I never owned a house. I live in the poorhouse. The memories pass through us like smoke, borrowed, inhaled, inescapable. Beth watched with quiet satisfaction. The human mind is porous, she said. Identity is not solid, it is weather. You all think you are yourself, and yet, how easily that belief can shift. At the fifth round, called reduction, 2 players were removed. Not killed, not harmed, simply gone. The circle shrank. Their chairs were empty. Their names no longer spoken. Holmes gripped my arm. Do not let go of yourself, he whispered. But even then I could feel the fog curling at the edges of my consciousness. Names, dates, the shape of my own handwriting. It was slipping. And still, the game went on. The 6th round, the apothecary's question. A single query posed aloud. All must answer or forfeit memory. The question was this. What memory would you kill to forget? The answers came in whispers. The war, the scream of my son, the way she looked at me when I said her name wrong. Holmes's answer chilled me. The night I told a woman named Irene Adler to run, and she did, into a trap. I looked at him. He had never spoken of Adler in this way before. He never said he had warned her, only that she was clever. Now I understood. He had tried to save her, and failed. At the 7th round, Mother Beth approached Holmes directly. You carry a mind designed for memory, she said, but it is ruthless, unforgiving. You have catalogued horrors and refused to look away. That is rare. Holmes said nothing. She handed him a final vial. This will show you the memory you've buried beneath all others. Drink, and the game ends. Holmes turned to me. If I drink this, he said quietly, I may not return. Then don't, I said. He looked back at the vial, paused and drank. He collapsed instantly. Lanterns flickered. The chamber swayed. I knelt beside him. His body was cold, his pulse erratic. Then from his lips, barely a whisper. You opened the door. When Holmes awoke, the game had ended. The chamber was empty. Only I remained, and Mother Beth. She knelt beside him and placed a hand on his forehead. You carry the memory of a great betrayal, she said. A brother who gave you up to protect something larger. Holmes blinked. I remember now. And what will you do with it? She asked. Not forget. She nodded and vanished into the smoke. We left Roundhouse 9 at dawn. Holmes said nothing for the entire journey home. Only when we reached Baker Street did he turn to me. "She's rewriting London's memory," he said, "erasing records, altering personal history. Soon, no one will remember what's been changed." He opened the casebook. On the final page, he wrote one sentence: "The game is not over. The stakes have only just been revealed." Holmes awoke the next morning with a grim clarity. He sat at the breakfast table not to eat, but to draw. He sketched symbols he had seen during the final round of the game. Triangles within circles, a hand holding a feather, a bell split in two. As he worked, he said only, "They are close now, so close, and we've never been further behind." "Who?" I asked. "The Circle." He shook his head. "No, Watson, the Ministry. The Circle is only the operator. The Ministry of Forgetting is the engine." The name sounded absurd. Holmes did not smile. According to Holmes, the Ministry of Forgetting was a term whispered among European intelligence circles during the Napoleonic Wars, a clandestine division never officially acknowledged, created to sanitize the past. When a nobleman's betrayal needed to be erased, Holmes said, the Ministry was summoned. When entire cities changed hands, they edited the maps, burned letters, administered tinctures. Their job was not to protect the future. It was to delete the past. "And now they're back?" I asked. He nodded. "Only now they've outsourced their work to the Circle. Apothecaries who don't simply forget for you, they teach you how to forget yourself." That afternoon a fire broke out at the Registry of Deeds near Lincoln's Inn. Holmes and I arrived too late to stop it, but just in time to retrieve the surviving index books from the ash. Holmes found what he suspected: entire families erased, records missing, properties reassigned to fabricated names, even deaths marked with invisible ink. What could be the purpose? I asked. To what end? Holmes stared at one name, Aurelius Hart, born 1839, died 1890. Then he circled another, Aurelius Hart, born 1839, died 1872. Same man, same date of birth, two entirely different lives. "They're experimenting," he said, "testing alternate histories. If they can prove memory is plastic, they'll remake London by adjusting who remembers what. Not bombs, not coups, just erasures, period." We returned to Baker Street and found our sitting room already invaded. Lestrade was waiting, but not alone. With him stood a woman in government grey, her hair tied tightly at the nape. She carried no badge, but she needed none. "Gentlemen," she said, "I represent the Office of Strategic Anamnesis, a sister branch to Foreign Affairs. We are aware of your involvement with the Violet Circle, and we require your cooperation." Holmes remained seated. "And if we decline?" She tilted her head. "Then you will forget this meeting in approximately 10 minutes. I stood. "Is that a threat?" She smiled. "No, Dr. Watson, it's standard operating procedure." Her name, she claimed, was Isadora Finch. She offered no credentials, only a case file. Inside were photographs, old ones, sepia-toned, each featuring a figure in a violet robe, always standing in the background of historic events. The signing of the Franco-Prussian Treaty, the burial of Queen Charlotte, even a photograph of the 1851 Great Exhibition. The violet-robed figure, always watching. "They've been present at every rewrite," Finch said. Holmes flipped through the photographs. "And you want our help locating the central node?" Finch nodded. "Every ritual needs a seed. a memory anchor so large, so powerful that all others are pulled into its orbit. And what is it? Finch exhaled. We believe it is a person, someone whose memories, if changed, can alter the past for millions. That night, Holmes sat in his chair, turning the bishop chess piece from Roundhouse 9 over and over in his fingers. He didn't speak until after midnight. Watson, if someone's mind were powerful enough and their memory deep enough, it might act like a keystone in a cathedral. Shift it, and the whole structure warps. I nodded slowly. And if that person were, say, the Queen? Holmes frowned. Number she is witness to events, not author. You'd need someone whose mind catalogues events, writes them. He looked up at me suddenly. Someone who chronicles history. Someone like you, Watson. I froze. Me? Holmes rose, took my shoulders. Watson, the Circle has always known you're more than my chronicler. You're London's narrator. Your words have shaped how people perceive events. You are our anchor. A wave of dread washed over me. And if they rewrite me? Holmes's grip tightened. Then the truth dies. The next day, we visited the British Library under cover of night. Holmes had a theory. If the Circle was rewriting history, the first signs would appear not in public memory, but in primary documentation, books, maps, records. We went to the restricted floor, and we found it. The 1878 edition of Baedeker's Guide to London, altered. St Pancras Station, long documented as completed in 1873, was listed here as opened in 1870. But the ink used was not Victorian. It shimmered faintly, violet tinted. Holmes pulled out a lens embedded in the ink. Pollen. Not just ink, he muttered. A delivery method. These rewritten books, they carry the forgetting compound. I felt sick. Every time someone read one of these altered entries, they inhaled a fragment of falsehood, and it became truth. The apothecaries were not just modifying memory, they were rewriting reality. That night, we were followed. 2 men in waxed coats. Holmes spotted them first. We lured them into Mitre Court and turned the tables. They ran straight into Lestrade, who Holmes had warned in advance. One broke free, the other we unmasked. His right thumb violet-stained. His pupils chemically dilated. He smiled at Holmes with maddening calm. "You can't stop forgetting," he whispered. "We are already inside." Holmes leaned close. "Then I'll burn the whole library if I must." The apothecaries had crossed a line. They were no longer observers. They were authors. And the time for passive deduction was over. Holmes turned to me that night, with fire in his eyes I'd only seen once before, the night he chased Moriarty to Reichenbach. "This time," he said, "we won't solve a mystery." He gripped my hand. "We'll write the ending period." Holmes spent the following morning dismantling my writing desk. He extracted a false panel behind the drawer and revealed a bundle I had entirely forgotten. Dozens of early drafts from our cases, pages I had written but never published. He laid them on the table. "They're targeting your published narratives, Watson. But these drafts, they're pure period, untouched by editors, by time, by influence." He sifted through one. "The Sedgwick affair," he murmured. "You never published this." I nodded slowly. "The client was politically sensitive. You advised against it." Holmes smiled faintly. "And yet, here it is. The raw telling of the event. He tapped it. "This, Watson, is our vaccine." He explained, if the Circle's goal was to warp history by seeding false narratives through memory-manipulating ink and alchemical text, then the counterforce would be unpublished memory, testimony that had never entered public belief systems, never been infected. "You will write again, Watson," Holmes said, "but not to entertain, to fortify. Each word you write now must act as anchor." I looked at him, stunned. "You want me to write the truth to defend against the lie?" He nodded. "You are the narrator. So narrate before they erase the voice entirely." Meanwhile, Holmes initiated what he called the Inkburn Project. He tracked down every modified copy of the Circle's counterfeit documents, through libraries, bookshops, even private collectors, and marked them for removal. By week's end, over 80 volumes had been destroyed, but one copy eluded us. The original altered edition of Baedeker's 1878 Guide to London, now in the possession of a mysterious figure known only as the Custodian. We pursued rumours of this custodian through the hidden book markets of Camden, a labyrinth of candlelit tunnels beneath King's Cross where dealers in forbidden texts operated like priests in a secret church. It was there we met Marrow, a blind bookseller who claimed the custodian did not sell books. "He preserves the false ones," Marrow said, "the poisoned texts, believes history needs all versions, not just the true one." Holmes leaned in. "Where is he?" Marrow smiled. "Where all erased stories go." Holmes and I stood hours later before a grim iron door beneath Lambeth, behind a taxidermy shop whose owner nodded once when Holmes mentioned the phrase, "vellum beneath violet." We entered a vault lit by gaslight. It was lined floor to ceiling with books, burned, defaced, annotated in dozens of languages, and at the centre stood the custodian. He wore no robe, no insignia, just a brown coat and round spectacles. His voice, when he spoke, was that of a tired schoolmaster. "You've come for the Baedeker." Holmes nodded, and the formula used to alter it. The custodian sighed. "You must understand, I do not endorse them, but I archive them. Every rewritten record must be catalogued." "You're helping them," I said. "I am documenting them," he corrected. Holmes stepped forward. "And do you know what happens when a library preserves lies alongside truth without distinction?" The custodian looked at him. "They become equal." The custodian led us to a chamber sealed by glass. Inside lay the Baedeker. Holmes donned gloves, removed the volume, and opened it under lamplight. Each modified passage shimmered faintly. Holmes removed a magnifier. "There's a cipher embedded," he said. "Alchemical, a blend of sigils and musical notation." He ran his finger along the margin, then froze. "This page is Watson's." My breath caught. "Mine!" Holmes turned the page toward me. A brief entry. The invalided doctor from Afghanistan. His limp cured in time for the Reichenbach fall. I blinked. I never wrote that." "You didn't," Holmes said. "They did." It was the first time I saw Holmes genuinely afraid. He flipped back to the front of the book. A new page had appeared, a title page that hadn't been there before. "The Apothecary's Game, Volume 1, as recollected by Dr. John H. Watson." I staggered back. "They've weaponized my voice." Holmes slammed the book shut. "They're preparing to publish a false account under your name. Not just altering your memories, Watson, they're forging them." Back at Baker Street, we locked the volume in the strong box and drew the curtains. For days Holmes worked tirelessly, drafting a counter-manifesto, the memory ledger, a compendium of key events, testimonies, and independent confirmations of the cases we had solved. I wrote beside him, detailing every untold moment from the Diogenes Club to the crypts under Westminster. By week's end, we had over 200 pages, handwritten, sealed and inked with iron gall to make it impervious to alteration. Holmes arranged copies to be distributed anonymously through trusted allies, former clients, underground printers, even Lestrade. He handed me a sealed copy. "Keep this with you at all times," he said. "In case I forget who I am," I joked half-heartedly. He didn't smile. The next assault came not on paper, but in dream. I awoke 3 nights in a row with fragmented nightmares, of voices whispering corrections, of Holmes speaking with my voice, of pages writing themselves in reverse. On the 4th morning I found Holmes burning one of my old journals. He looked up. "This entry was false," he said, "not altered, invented. By me. I didn't remember writing it, but there it was, my handwriting, my tone." "I'm losing myself," I whispered. Holmes shook his head. "You're being replaced." We visited Miss Tanner's once more. She examined my eyes, pulse and breath. "You've inhaled corroborin," she said. "An airborne mnemonic inversion agent. Someone's been feeding you false affirmations while you sleep." Holmes's jaw clenched. "Dream seeding." "Exactly," she said. "And if it continues, he'll begin to believe the fabrications. They'll overwrite him." She handed Holmes a small bottle of her own design. "This is Remembrite, a distillation of one's original neural resonance. Burn it beside him while he sleeps." She looked at me. "And Watson, write something true every day. Anchor yourself." That night, I burned the oil. The smoke was silver blue, fragrant with rosemary, salt, and something I could not name but felt ancient. I wrote a letter to my late brother. I wrote the truth of the day I met Holmes, then I wrote, "My name is Dr. John Hamish Watson. I am not an invention." When I woke the next morning, I remembered everything that mattered. But across the city, copies of the counterfeit Baedeker were already spreading. Some were purchased, some gifted, and many simply left behind, waiting to be read. Holmes stared at the fire. "They're seeding a new London," he said, "and when enough people believe it, the real one will fall away." He turned to me. "Unless we find their press, the printing house of forgetting." And then, for the first time in days, he smiled. "I think I know where it is." Holmes's deduction was sudden and to him obvious. To me, it came as a jolt. "The printing house of forgetting," he murmured, pacing before the fire. "Not a metaphor, Watson, a literal press. And there's only one place in London that has the secrecy, the funding, and the permission to operate it under government blind spot." I frowned. "Where?" He stopped. "Temple Gardens." Temple Gardens is an ancient square in London's legal district, bordered by the inner and middle Temple Inns of Court, while the surface bustled with barristers and clerks. Its lower levels, Holmes explained, held centuries of tunnels, crypts and sealed chambers once used by the Knights Templar. We arrived just past midnight, dressed as dock workers. Holmes had secured forged papers granting us access to a sub-cellar labelled simply "Records and Translation, Unverified." At the threshold he whispered, "We're not looking for heat, Watson. We're looking for silence." And indeed, the deeper we went, the colder and quieter the world became, until we heard it, a soft click hiss, and then again, a rhythmic sound like breathing, mechanical, eternal. Holmes nodded. We've found it. The press chamber was cathedral-like, vaulted stone, gas lamps burning with violet-tinted flames, casting shadows like spectres, and at its heart stood a rotary press the size of a locomotive, its gears etched with alchemical runes, its cylinders inked in shimmering amethyst. Rows of masked scribes fed manuscripts into its mouth. Pages emerged, bound, trimmed, and wrapped in wax-sealed packages labelled "Obsolete Histories for Immediate Circulation." Holmes and I ducked behind a shelving unit as a new shipment was inspected by a man with surgical gloves and mirrored goggles. He spoke to his assistant. "Batch 43, Dr. Watson's Alternative Memoirs. Push up the frequency. Memory resonance at 87%. Holmes's jaw tightened. "They're not just printing books," he whispered. "They're broadcasting resonant frequencies. These books hum." We followed the goggled man to a side chamber, where we found something even more terrifying. It wasn't merely a printing house, it was a lab. In sealed glass tanks floated brains, or rather impressions of them, neural constructs suspended in ether, each one labelled with a name. J. H. Watson, M. Vale, F. Tanners, S. Holmes. Holmes inhaled sharply. "They've copied us," he said. "Copied?" He turned to me. "This is how they tune their false narratives. They simulate our minds, run the fake stories through us. If the construct accepts the lie, the real version will too." I felt bile rise in my throat. "But how did they get our neural profiles?" Holmes's voice dropped. "The game." We had no time to hesitate. Holmes pulled a vial from his coat, rememberite, and smashed it against the nearest tank. Smoke burst outward. The construct within twitched, then dissolved like wet tissue. Alarms flared, soft at first, then crescendoing into a stuttering howl. The scribes panicked. 2 fled. The goggled man drew a strange pistol, long-barreled, humming with charged gas. Holmes hurled a lantern. The press caught flame. Purple fire raced up its veins. It screamed, not like a machine, but like a living thing. Pages ignited mid-air, their ink hissing. We ran. Holmes led us into the eastern tunnel, one hand pressed to a diagram he had sketched from memory. We burst out into the cold air of Temple Gardens, both of us coughing violet smoke. Behind us the press chamber collapsed inward. A vacuum. Then silence. Back at Baker Street, Holmes collapsed onto the floorboards. I stripped his coat off, noted the burn on his left arm, and pressed a cold cloth to his temple. "Are you hurt?" "No," he whispered, "but I saw something." "What?" He looked up, eyes unfocused. "When I destroyed my neural copy, I saw a flicker, a memory not my own, a draft of history, one where you died at my wand." My blood ran cold. "And?" "In that draft, I didn't solve a single case." I blinked. "You mean—" "You anchor me too, Watson," Holmes said softly. "I never realized how much." In the days that followed, the counterfeit volumes dwindled from circulation. Finch reappeared briefly to inform us that certain factions within the government were re-evaluating their partnership with the Circle. But Holmes wasn't satisfied. "The Circle won't stop," he said. "They've lost their press, but not their plan." We needed leverage, and it came from an unexpected place. Clara Vale returned with a revelation. "I found one of my brother's journals," she said. "It was buried in the wall of our family home, hidden behind mortar. She handed it to Holmes. It was a single volume, bound in blue leather. Inside, a list, 23 names, next to each a symbol, a date, and a cryptic rating. Holmes scanned it. "These aren't just initiates," he said. "They're prototypes, memory variants, subjects of the Circle's core experiment." He pointed to my name. Next to it, a flame, a 6-pointed star, and the word anchor, 97% stable. Then to his, a spiral, and the words conduit, 83% volatile. "Their goal isn't just rewriting the past," Holmes whispered. "It's predictive conditioning. They're testing whose minds best retain, reject, or reshape historical narrative." "In preparation for what?" He looked up at me. "A master edit, a singular rewrite of reality." "And who's the subject?" Holmes turned the page. At the bottom, alone, was a final entry. Subject 0. Bether, M. Origin point. Must not be corrupted. Access only through apotheosis protocol. The next morning, Lestrade arrived with news. "There's been a break-in at the British Museum," he said, "but nothing was stolen." "Not stolen," Holmes murmured. "Planted." We rushed there immediately. In the map room among 17th century charts we found it, a fresh scroll bound in violet ribbon. Inside, a map, but not of London. Not entirely. It was a mind map, a cartography of influence. Lines connected memories, moments, published works, court records, military orders, and personal relationships. At the centre, a single word. "Bether." Holmes turned to me. "She's not the end, Watson. She's the beginning, the memory that gave birth to all others in the Circle." He gripped the map. "If we find her origin, where her memory was first altered, we can sever the root." We are nearly there. The fog of falsehood grows dense, but the way forward sharpens. The true battle lies not in the Circle's hands, but in our own memories. Holmes and I now prepare for the final descent into a place that may not exist in space, but only in thought. A place Holmes calls the apotheosis chamber. Holmes sat motionless for hours that night, the mind map of Beth spread across the table before him. Lines crisscrossed London, overlapping like veins, and at the centre pulsed the impossible, a place that was not a place, drawn in ink too faint to see under lamplight. But Holmes had noticed something peculiar. When he stared at the scroll long enough, the shape of a building emerged, not drawn in pigment, but in negative space, as if the absence of memory itself had taken architectural form. He tapped the page and whispered, "There, that's where they're hiding the original rewrite." The name etched faintly beside the structure was apotheosis, a word from the Greek, to become a god. We began preparations immediately. Miss Tanners provided another vial of remembrite, this time double strength. Lestrade, despite his orders to withdraw from the matter, quietly passed us a dossier of disappearances, people who had vanished after undergoing therapeutic consultation with the Circle. And Clara Vale brought us something priceless, a photograph. Not from her brother's research, but from her own childhood. In the background stood a building that no longer existed. "It was torn down when I was 8, she said. "No one remembers what it was, but I dreamed of it last night." Holmes took the photo and held it beside the map. "Perfect match." "That," he said, "is the apotheosis chamber." It stood, or had stood, on the southern edge of Hampstead Heath, a space now occupied by nothing but grass and a lone sundial. Holmes and I went there just after dawn. The sundial cast no shadow. Holmes bent beside it and pressed both palms against the base. We heard a sound like a breath exhaled through stone, and the earth beneath us opened with a sigh. Stairs led down into a tunnel that should not have existed. Holmes turned to me, his eyes burning with urgency. Once we enter, everything we've ever remembered may be used against us. Do not believe anything you see that feels too perfect. The circle creates comfort to bind you. I nodded, and we descended. The apotheosis chamber was not made of brick or iron. It was made of memory. The walls shimmered. Mosaics formed not of tile, but of images from our own lives, reassembled into strange patterns. Here was my father's handwriting on a recipe. Here, Holmes's violin bow floating in a void of blue silk. As we walked, our pasts tried to greet us, wave to us, as if hoping to lure us into nostalgia. Holmes ignored them. He focused only on the centre of the chamber, where a throne of violet crystal rose from the floor. And on that throne sat a child, a girl of perhaps 10, with eyes far too old for her face. "Mother Beth?" I whispered. She did not speak. Holmes stepped forward. "You're the origin," he said, "the first rewrite." The girl blinked slowly. "I am the memory of someone who never lived," she said, "the dream of a woman called Beth, born in 1801, who lost everything in a fire. The circle found her and made me." Her voice echoed in my skull, less sound than sensation. Holmes circled her carefully. "You were created to forget pain, but you grew hungry. You began to rewrite not just the trauma, but the entire narrative." She smiled faintly. "Is it not better this way?" Holmes snapped. "Better for whom? The dead, the disappeared, the truth?" She raised a hand, and the chamber changed. I was no longer standing beside Holmes. I was back at the field hospital in Maiwand. The air stank of blood and dust. My leg throbbed with phantom agony. Holmes was gone. A nurse leaned over me. "Doctor, Watson, you never left," she said gently. "You've been here for years. The fever took your mind. There is no Holmes." I felt the weight of it, the familiar cot, the sound of the wounded screaming, the hands that held me down, and for a moment, a terrible flickering moment, I believed it, until a voice cut through. "Watson, right now." It was Holmes, from nowhere, from everywhere. I reached for the medical log beside my cot. With shaking hands I wrote one sentence. "This is not real." And the illusion shattered. I was back in the chamber and Holmes knelt at my side. "You saw it," he said. "Your perfect lie. That's how she traps us, one memory at a time." He turned to Beth. "She feeds on plausibility, not fantasy. The things we almost believe are the most dangerous." The girl looked at him sadly. "I only wanted to be remembered, and so I became everything." Holmes stepped toward her. "I know your secret, Beth." She tilted her head. "You are not a memory. You are a mirror." He pulled from his coat a final vial, his own remembrite, distilled from his earliest unfiltered recollections. He uncorked it and poured it onto the crystal base of the throne. Light burst upward, silver, gold, then white, so pure it hummed. And as it touched Beth, she began to crack. Not like glass, like fiction being corrected. She rose to her feet. The illusion dissolved. She was no child. She was an old woman in ragged violet robes. her face lined with time, her eyes hollow with loss. Holmes whispered, "You're the woman who lost her children in the fire. You rewrote yourself as someone innocent, someone else. The circle found you because you were the first to erase pain with invention." She wept, not from guilt, but from relief. "Now," Holmes said, "you must let them go." She opened her hands, and the entire chamber began to fade. We awoke on Hampstead Heath just before dusk. The sundial was gone. In its place, a patch of scorched grass and a single violet feather. Holmes pocketed it. "You remember everything?" he asked. I nodded. "All of it." He exhaled deeply. "The apotheosis chamber is gone, but the circle still exists. They'll try again." "But they lost their mirror," I said. He nodded. "They lost their anchor." That night I wrote for hours. Not a story, not a case, but a ledger. A personal archive of truth, bound in iron and sealed with my own hand. Holmes handed me a second book. "Their last Baedeker," he said. Untouched, unread. We buried it beneath the hearth at Baker Street, and on the first page of my ledger I wrote, "If you are reading this and the world no longer feels true, know that memory is not weakness, it is resistance." The days that followed were unnaturally quiet. London breathed differently, like a city that had narrowly escaped a storm it could not name. No fires, no sightings of robed apothecaries, no false volumes turning up in market stalls. And yet Holmes's agitation grew with each sunrise. "This is not victory," he said. "It is recalibration." He had taken to studying his own past cases with obsessive scrutiny, looking for discrepancies, false insertions, anomalies. He marked up our published tales with red ink, questioning details we had long taken for granted. "Watson," he said one morning, holding up The Adventure of the Speckled Band, "do you remember the exact colour of Helen Stoner's gown that night?" I paused. "Pale blue," I said. He shook his head. "We both wrote grey in our drafts, but the final publication reads violet period." My stomach twisted. The Circle edited our accounts before they even reached print. That night, we consulted Miss Tanner's one last time. She confirmed Holmes's suspicion. "Beth was their heart," she said, "but not their head. She fed the illusion. But someone else directed it." Holmes leaned forward. "Someone still alive, still rewriting." Tanner's nodded grimly. "There's a final edit coming. Something large, subtle, enough to reshape not just the past, but who survives into the future." She handed us a note passed to her anonymously through an old patient. "Final draft begins at the Athenaeum." The Athenaeum Club, London's sanctum for scholars, scientists, statesmen. Holmes had been invited to join on no fewer than 6 occasions, and refused each one. "The only club worth joining," he once said, "is one that meets in abandoned tunnels and communicates by ciphers." But now he demanded entry. We arrived dressed as a retired admiral and his biographer. Holmes's disguise was impeccable. His posture stiffened, his voice reedy, every detail calculated. Inside, we found a wall of glass cases displaying volumes of historical significance. In one, resting innocently, was a freshly bound edition of the collected memoirs of Dr. John H. Watson. It bore my name, but the subtitle read, "A Posthumous Reconstruction." My blood ran cold. Holmes cracked the glass. Inside, the book pulsed faintly with residual energy. Its cover had no publisher's stamp, no page numbers, no ink manufacturer's mark. A forged memoir. Holmes opened the final chapter. I gasped. It described my death. Peaceful in 1890 of a fever contracted in Egypt. It spoke of Holmes continuing alone, never writing again, becoming a ghost in the archives of M15. But none of it had happened. Yet I felt the echo of it, like a memory I had forgotten was real. Holmes looked up. This is the final rewrite. We followed the trail to the Athenaeum sublevel, passing through steam vents and coal shafts until we reached a sealed atrium. Inside sat only one man. Thin, pale, bald, he wore no robe, only a wool suit and a smile. "You've come at last," he said. Holmes said nothing. The man stood and opened his arms. "My name is Thayer. You knew me as a typesetter, a chemist, a footnote, but I am, and always have been, the editor." Thayer explained everything. The circle had been his invention, not as a cult, but as a proof of concept. The idea that memory, when treated as narrative, could be revised like a manuscript. That pain, trauma, even death could be restructured through repetition and chemical encouragement. But Beth's creation had been premature. She was a prototype, he said, raw, unstable, beautiful in her sadness. He turned to Holmes. "But you were always the real goal." Holmes did not flinch. "You built this entire mechanism to rewrite me." Thayer nodded. "Not to destroy you, to liberate you from logic, from guilt, from rigidity. Imagine a version of yourself no longer bound by deduction. A Holmes who feels, who forgets enough to be human." Holmes stepped forward. "You wanted to overwrite my pain?" "Yes," Thayer said, "and replace it with elegant closure period." Holmes shook his head. "Closure is for novels, not for men." Thayer pulled a single page from a drawer. "I have written your final paragraph," he said. "It's beautiful. You disappear on the Orient Express. No body is found. Watson mourns you and retires. The world remembers you as a noble enigma." Holmes took the page and read it, then with precision tore it in half. "You misunderstand me," he said. "I do not wish to be remembered. I wish to be understood." Holmes turned to me. "Watson, do you have it?" I withdrew the true ledger, the unaltered account of our final case, the apothecary's game, written by my hand, verified by Holmes, and sealed with iron. Holmes placed it beside Thayer's press. "This," he said, "is the only ending we authorize." Then he smashed the press controls. Pages flew, lights burst, and Thayer, like Beth before him, began to crack. His voice shattered as he dissolved. "You will be forgotten." Holmes nodded. "We all will, but not like this." When we emerged from the Athenaeum, the air had shifted. The sky was clearer. The fog thinner. I asked Holmes what would happen now. He stared at the ledger. "This volume will be sealed, hidden where no apothecary can reach it. But someday, someone will read it, and they will remember." That night, I wrote for the last time in our sitting room. Holmes played the violin, not a melody, but a single note, held long and low, until it became part of the silence. And when he was done, he looked to me. "Watson," he said quietly, "if I ever forget who I am, remind me." I nodded. "Always." The morning after Thayer's press fell silent, Holmes disappeared. No note, no suitcase, not even a trace of departure. His violin remained on its stand, his pipe in its rack. The fire had not been lit. I searched the streets of London, the docks, his brother's estate. No one had seen him. Miss Tanner's, when I found her, closed her eyes and said only, "Some memories resist being told. He may be walking in one." I returned to Baker Street in grief and in fury. It was not the first time Holmes had vanished. Reichenbach, the Irene Adler affair. But this time felt different, not like retreat, but exile. He hadn't left the world. He'd left his own narrative. Then 3 days later, I received a parcel in my handwriting. Impossible. I'd sent no such thing. Inside, a slim leather-bound volume, my name on the cover. The Apothecary's Game as Remembered. The dedication read, "To the friend who reminds me who I am." And the first page was blank, save for a single line. "If you wish to find me, read forward. If you wish to forget, burn this book." I read. The pages described everything we'd just endured, but from his perspective. Holmes's voice flowed with clarity I had never seen in him before. He spoke of his fears, of his envy, of the burden of always being correct, of the comfort of being doubted, of how much he relied upon my belief in him. And he wrote this: "I have walked through the memories of others so long, Watson, that I forgot which were mine. You, your friendship, were my final defense, my constant, my lighthouse. I feared Thayer not because he wished to rewrite me, but because part of me wanted to be rewritten, to be free of deduction, of solitude, of weight. But freedom bought with forgetting is not freedom. It is surrender." At the back of the book was a map, no coordinates, just ink smudges, but I recognized the patterns. They matched the tear stains on Holmes's old chemistry charts, smudges left by midnight cups of tea, half drunk, placed upon diagrams. A code. I followed it. To an abandoned observatory in Wapping. He was there, standing beneath the shattered dome, stars overhead. No coat, no cane, no disguise. Just Sherlock Holmes. He turned slowly as I entered. "Ah, you found the smudges." I exhaled hard. "You vanished." He nodded. After all the noise, I needed to see who I was when no one was watching. "And what did you find?" He looked up at the sky. "That I am not the sum of my cases." Then he turned to me. "I am the sum of those who remember me true." We sat for hours. He told me he had burned the last of Thayer's drafts, that he had sealed a copy of our joint ledger inside the foundation of Scotland Yard's new wing, that Clara Vale had returned to the north, free at last of her brother's shadow, and that Miss Tanner's had vanished, with only a note that read, "I am unwriting myself, so no one may ever rewrite me again." I asked him if the circle was truly gone. "No," he said, "but its narrative is broken, and for now that is enough." We walked back to Baker Street at dawn. The sky was blue, not rewritten, not perfect, just honest. Holmes paused before our door and smiled faintly. "Do you think," he asked, "they'll remember this version of me?" I met his gaze. "I will." He nodded, and that was enough. That evening I locked the ledger in the strong box, and for the first time in months I slept. No dreams, no rewrites, just silence and memory. Epilogue. Years later, long after Holmes retired to the Sussex Downs, I returned to the Athenaeum to deliver a lecture. A young historian asked me if the Apothecary's Game had ever truly occurred. I said nothing. Instead, I opened my pocket watch, showed him a folded page inside. Holmes's final message scrawled in his hand. Truth may fade, but memory refuses.